Alright YouTube, so similarly to my Anakin Skywalker movie series pitch, this vlog is also sort of an on-the-go idea, but I have been thinking about it all day. I don't have a structure, but I thought I would give myself the fun opportunity and sort of challenge to sort of come up with the best thing I can think of for a movie pitch for a not sci-fi, but rather fantasy, like magic fantasy, like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings style fantasy for Pokemon, but particularly the best generation I think for this theme would be the second generation Johto, because so many Pokemon just fit the bill, from the starters to the legendaries. And I'm even looking at a list right behind, or on my phone rather, about Gen 2 Pokemon, and so many movie pitch ideas are just pouring in this head. And yes, that is Shiny Umbreon, and yes, that will be mentioned later in this vlog, so stay tuned for my best ideas for the Johto fantasy Pokemon. Alright, so I have done an insect movie Pokemon movie pitch that the star of that was Sizzle, who's a Gen 2 Pokemon, so I'll skip past that idea and go into the... Well, I was honestly going to skip past that idea because, the Sizzle or Pokemon bug type movie was more sci-fi than a fantasy, although the two are arguably alike. So one thing I definitely want to include in this Pokemon fantasy movie is sort of all sorts of elements, as there are many types in the Johto region, from Dark to Psychic to, we actually got the new Dark and Steel type, which I believe is cool, and that could incorporate well into a movie, seeing the Dark types like Umbreon. And there we go into the shiny Umbreon aspect. I think Umbreon deserves his own movie, but so does his twin Espeon, the opposite sides of the same coin. That could be a great movie, so I'll put that movie pitch idea out there for myself. But one thing I do think that would actually work well with a Pokemon fantasy movie is sort of this inspiration from Lord of the Rings of, like, young kids, sort of kiddish, I guess, going on a journey and being approached by wizards, which in this case would be the Pokemon professors, and, a lurky, creepy character in the background that turns out to be Golem, but not Golem from Pokemon, but probably a Generation 3 Pokemon that, I know it says Generation 2, but that could incorporate well to the third generation Sableye, because he's kind of like the Golem of Pokemon, or at least the Lord of the Rings Golem of course, with all the elements. Something incorporated well into this Pokemon fantasy movie would be the sea, which, the guardian of the sea, Lugia, who's not a water type, but has gotten his own movie, which he definitely deserves well. And of course, Ho-Oh, the fiery Pokemon that is a fire type, actually. Fortunately, the Sunbird Phoenix is a fire type, but for whatever reason, Lugia is not a water type. Not the big deal, but, I just think it's kind of funny. And But in a more serious note, we definitely need to see Lantern in this movie. No, Lantern wasn't in the Pokemon Detective Pikachu movie, which makes sense because, that's kind of what I kind of like about Lantern, is it's sort of my hidden gem Pokemon, but I want Lantern to go mainstream-ish and sort of be popular in more Pokemon media because it deserves much praise. And, of course, Ampharos is sort of the land equivalent of Lantern, where he has a shiny light on its tail and is the light in the dark, which would definitely be a good lesson and good moral lesson and fun life lessons. And I'm repeating myself too many times, but the point is, I think they could make a good story with Lanterns and Amphiroses. And at least for this Jones Beach style Pokemon fantasy movie, I would make the Chikorita line fairy types, because although the fairy type didn't technically exist in the Johto region, this is like, set in present, technically not present day time, but let's just say present generation of Pokemon, and let's just pretend the fairy type always was and always is in this Pokemon cinematic universe. So definitely fairies belong in fantasy and sort of that genre, which is perfect for the Pokemon. And I think Typhlosion and Feraligatr are also cool, that they could sort of be sort of the rough and tough kind of Pokemon, on the contrary to Meganium and the Chikorita line. Of course, Bayleaf, one of my faves. But one thing I definitely want to see in this movie is, like, the Pokemon Trainer Red incorporated, as definitely that could be a great either cliffhanger or ending to the first part and conclude to the second Pokemon fantasy movie, where we see Red on the mountain. That's sort of a great Empire Strikes Back style ending, although that's a sci-fi movie and this is a fantasy movie. But I definitely want to see, and I feel like it could be good to incorporate the human elements of Pokemon into Pokemon universe. And by that I mean it quite literally, like, the human characters could be great for a fantasy movie, because I don't know, Pokemon's kind of fantasy anyway. And like I said, this vlog is kind of unstructured, but just me throwing out some ideas I have for my draft to the draft of a Pokemon fantasy movie pitch. So I'll conclude this by saying I think a perfect unused and sort of scrap Pokemon is the werewolf that was going to be included in Generation 2. Would be perfect villain or antagonistic character for this movie. So, that's all I'll say, and I can't wait to finally put structure to this vlog. But What do you guys think? Did I cook, or was I just like, spewing? I don't know, but thank you guys for watching. I love Pokemon. Stay tuned for more vlogs soon. Goodbye.